Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran, and today we'll be doing an Assassination Rogue PvP guide. We'll be talking about everything you need to know for Assassination in patch 8.3. In this new patch of BFA, Assassination is still a spec that's very strong in PvP. It has great control, decent mobility, good output for burst and sustained damage, and right now it is the most consistent spec of Rogue that a lot of people are playing. I wanted to make a guide on the most popular spec of Rogue for PvP, just to make sure any of you coming into patch 8.3 are aware of how to play it, how to gear, and overall how to perform well. We'll start with the talents. In the first talent row, Master Poisoner is going to increase the overall damage of our poisons, and is also going to impact the effectiveness of our healing reduction and slow and poison that we apply to our enemies. In the second row, we're going to be taking Subterfuge for the damage increase of Garrod, but also the immense amount of control that we gain at the very start of a game. In the third row of talents, we'll be picking up Mark for Death. It is a useful tool for us to get instant counter points, which will be useful in establishing kidney shots and even aggressive envenoms on enemies. In the fourth talent row, Elusiveness ends up being the best option for us in PvP. Just be sure to press Feint before you take a lot of damage from an enemy. In the fifth row, we'll be taking Internal Bleeding, which adds a bleed effect to our kidney shot, which makes kidney shot a lot more aggressive, but also a lot more mandatory when it comes to securing kills on the enemy kill target. In the sixth row, we'll be taking Toxic Blade, which will allow for some great sustained damage from our poisons, but also can be used during aggressive burst situations to set up quite a bit of damage from envenoms. In the final row, we'll be taking Poison Bomb. This ultimately becomes the only viable choice in this row. Poison Bomb is very RNG, as it can proc a poison pool under your enemy from ruptures and envenoms. However, if this does proc for sustained damage, it adds up to quite a bit of damage. But it is the best when it procs during burst, because it'll simply add towards extra damage. Being the only single target viable choice in this row, we don't really have other talents to pick from, particularly for PvP. For your trinket slot, I recommend running Gladiator's Medallion. Relentless and Adaptation can be run in specific situations, but unfortunately, unless you are an orc or a human, you don't really have too many viable options. So as a non-human or orc player, I would go with Gladiator's Medallion. For your first honor talent, you want to go System Shock. This will give you extra burst when it comes to bursting down on enemies with envenoms, but also it'll help control the enemy by applying a powerful slow for 2 seconds. Next honor talent you'll want to grab is Smoke Bomb. It'll be used to create line of sight around an enemy. Enemies cannot see into Smoke Bomb or out of Smoke Bomb. This has a couple different uses. Usually it will be used to lock down an enemy in a stun and drop a Smoke Bomb to cover them. The last honor talent is mostly up to you, but here are some of the more viable options for you to pick from. Maneuverability will use Sprint for 4 seconds in order to suppress some of the slows applied on you. Great against mages and death knights in particular, or any comps that are going to kite you around the room. Another viable option is mind-numbing poison against enemies that are casters. If you're not going to be kited, this will allow you a little bit extra damage against enemies that will be constantly casting spells. If you are facing against a team with no casters and primarily a melee composition, then Creeping Venom will end up being a lot better for you. Both of those poisons are fairly easy to manage. Creeping Venom, you just gotta make sure you get an envenom on an enemy. Most melee will keep refreshing this buff because every time you move, you refresh its full duration. For Assassination Rogue essences, we have a couple different options, but for the most part, your main slot is going to be filled with Crucible of Flame. Crucible of Flame plays very well with Assassination because of all the dot damage that you do. The dot damage can proc Crucible of Flame, which is quite good. The passive burns your enemy and can stack up. And the active ability also does quite a bit of damage and leaves a nasty dot on the enemy. Again, very well played if you want to play more of a dot-based game. However, you also could go for something like Breath of the Dying. This one has been a popular option as of recent. It has a bit more front-loaded upfront damage, and it has a shorter cooldown when used on enemies with 20% health or 80% if you get this at rank 3. The passive for this one is also very good if you are getting your enemy below 20% health, because it starts proccing more often, so it has this execute mechanic. I would play around between Breath of the Dying and Crucible to find out which one is best for you, but for the build we're running right now, both of them are quite good. In all the other slots for your essences, you could fill it with Conflict and Strife, which will give you a stack and versatility buff. You should probably put Memory Lucid Dream, because this one does refund you back energy, which is quite good when playing Assassination. And in your last active slot, you can go with Breath of the Dying. The passive is great. The active ability is also great too. You could also replace it for something like Vision of Perfection to give you shorter vendettas, which will help you use vendettas more often on an enemy, and that might result in a faster kill. Let's say you have a team that will always trinket your vendetta. Shortening your vendetta with Vision of Perfection will allow you to lock him down in kidney, pop vendetta, they will trinket, pop a defensive. But by the time you have your vendetta back up, their trinket will not be back up, so you should be able to lock down the enemy and score the kill there. Some of the Azeroth gear that is recommended for Assassination. We have Shrouded Suffocation. Having at least 1 point of this in your gear does give you quite more powerful of an opener. Garrote cast from stealth generates 2 additional combo points and deals extra damage for 18 seconds. So this one is mostly done for the combo point generation, but the extra damage, at least 1 stack, is particularly good in PvP as well as PvE for Assassination. Another trait that's also good to have 1 off is Nothing Personal. Vendetta poisons the target, dealing extra nature damage over 20 seconds, and also grants you energy over 20 seconds. This can help you get your energy back a little bit faster in order to sink more burst, but also the nature damage that goes into Vendetta does add towards the burst of the spec. And then there's one trait that's particularly good for Assassination that you want to try to stack, which is Twist the Knife, which is going to apply for your sustained damage, but also towards your burst. Envenom deals extra additional damage per combo point spent, lasts 1 second longer if it critical strikes. You're particularly focusing on the extra damage that it applies. When it comes to your stats, Assassination is a little bit particular of a few stats. First, you want to get your haste anywhere between 18 to 20%. 18 to 20% is going to give you enough global cooldowns and dot tick uptime in order to have good energy. You don't really want to get more than 20%. 20 should be your maximum cap, and the lowest you want to have is 18. It's like the sweet spot for Assassination. Anything else starts to feel clunky. And then you want to dump as many points as you can from your gear into Versatility. Versatility is not only going to make you do more damage, since it increases the damage output of all your auto attacks, bleeds, certain essences, as well as your poisons. It also makes you a little bit tankier in order to survive enemy combat, and Assassination is for the most part quite a squishy spec. Then you want to put as many points as you can into your Mastery, and then Critical Strike. Critical Strike is not as effective in PvP, or is not as necessary. It does play with Assassination combo point generation, but it's a crit chance every single time. I would try to keep this one at about 20% at the very least, but you want to then funnel as much as you can, if you have to choose stats, into Mastery, since it'll increase the damage of your poisons as well as bleeds, which is where a majority of your damage comes from. When it comes to Assassination in PvP, trinkets are kind of important. Most of the time, you will just need PvP trinkets in order to do well in PvP, but certain PvE trinkets can be good too. Some of the trinkets I would recommend, first of all, would be an on-use trinket. Something like a Corrupted Gladiator's Badge is good. It'll give you extra primary stats on a 2-minute cooldown, and it'll give you passively Versatility. Versatility being our best stat defensively and offensively, ends up being kind of the best of both worlds. And the on-use effect lines up pretty well with Vendetta, so every 2 minutes we have quite a bit of burst. Another on-use trinket that's also good is a Maledict trinket. This one used to be particularly good in earlier patches, but it's still good now. It'll provide suppression to enemies' healing, can also be used in a 2v2 or a 3v3 when you have a couple of these. Somebody will throw out the Maledict, the healer will dispel it, the next person will throw out the Maledict, and the healer will be forced to deal with the necrotic effect. It can also be used to stop certain classes from being able to heal, like a Fire Mage waiting for the Cauterize proc, but if you hit him with a Maledict, you are sure to force certain cooldowns out of them. For some of the passive trinkets, you can either go for a more offensive option, like Corrupted Gladiator's Insignia, that will give you versatility and a chance to proc primary stats. Not as good as the on-use trinket, but still quite good if you need a passive. Another good passive could be a defensive option, like a Corrupted Gladiator Safeguard. If you know that you're going to be focused by an enemy, this trinket can definitely save you. And then there's certain raid trinkets that you can use. Now, the one raid trinket that I've seen rogues use, or really a lot of other DPS start to use, is the one from Dressagath. Writhing segment of Dressagath has a bit of agility, and an use effect is to do physical damage to all enemies around you. This trinket is on a fairly short cooldown of 1 minute to 20 seconds. The caveat with this one is it will do a lot of physical damage, but to everybody around you split. So if you have a bunch of pets and a bunch of other players around you, they'll actually split the damage. But if you have just one person near you, if you can single out a healer by themselves and use the Gesture Gas Trinket on them in a stun lock while Vendetta is running, then you'll be able to do quite a bit of damage. I actually opt out to play with this trinket as of right now for every spec that I have, because it's actually quite good, and I'm mostly just trying to practice to play around with it. But it's actually been quite effective for my playstyle. But I feel like the Corrupted Gladiator's badge, the versatility and the on-you stats can be just as good, and the extra versatility does give you a little bit more tankiness, which is useful, and I'd say more useful than the agility provided. Now let's talk a bit about assassination in your rotation. You want to make sure you equip the right poisons. You want to make sure you have wound poison, which will do nature damage to your enemy and reduce the amount of healing they get. With your Master Poisoner talent, your healing reduction will actually be 29%. And you want to make sure you also have crippling poison up on your enemy as well. With Master Poisoner, the effectiveness of that slow is going to be up to 60% rather than the normal 50%. So this should make the poisons a big part of your gameplay here. The base playstyle for Assassination is going to be to maintain Garrote on your enemy and maintaining Rupture. Rupture and Garrote are both going to give you energy with Venomous Wounds passive, which will let you regen 7 energy every time your bleeds tick on an enemy that is poisoned. You want to line up your common points and sink as many Envenoms into your enemy as possible, and try to use Envenoms in order to burst your enemy down. You also should be locking down your enemies with Kidney Shot because of the talent of Internal Bleeding. Normally, the best way of going about it in PvP is to put up your bleeds on the enemy, then build up the common points, stun lock your enemy, throw in a Toxic Blade in order to increase your nature damage, and sink as many Envenoms into your target, which are both buffed by Toxic Blade, and you can even throw in a Vendetta in order to increase your damage further on. But the base playstyle of Assassination is going to be put up your bleeds, maintain your bleeds at all times, lock your enemy in the stun, and sink as many Envenoms into them as possible. So now that you guys know the basics of what you're looking for, let's take a look at the openers so we can see why you would open the way you would. The first opener is going to be a soft opener. It establishes all of your dots and creates control off the bat. Best use on melee targets that can stun you if you don't stun lock them first. So anything like a warrior, rogue, ferals, anything that's going to do melee. Next opener is going to be a more aggressive opener where you're trying to force a trinket. This one is for melee targets but can also be used on casters as well. This is something you would want to use without having to blow Vendetta in the opener on any target. Then there's a specific opener for casters only that utilizes Garrote and the silence you get from Garrote to control the caster further. You Garrote him into a full Kidney Shot while still able to establish your dots. It just gives you more uptime. Don't do this against druids or monk healers. I'm going to play a slowed down version of these openers if you guys want to see the more detailed version of how I open. To properly burst this assassination, establish all of your dots, which can either be done in the opener or at a later time. Just because you're opening doesn't mean you need to burst. To burst with Vendetta, you want to first prime the enemy with all the dots present with a Toxic Blade, followed into a full Kidney Shot, into a Vendetta just so you have the most uptime, which might force an enemy to trinket, and try to dumpster as many Envenoms into the enemy as possible. Use your Azeroth ability as well in order to continue throwing in as much damage during that Vendetta window. It is also a good idea to combine as many unused trinkets as possible, have any, during the Vendetta window. Some of the other things you can do as assassination when you're doing sustain, and let's say there's more than one enemy. Let's say this isn't a player, but it's rather a pet, and you're hitting a hunter. Phantomizing the pet and the hunter can generate you extra common points for less energy spent. So you don't always have to press mutilate, which is quite costly in energy. 50 energy. Instead, you can go for something like a Phantomize, which is 35 energy, and it can generate you just as many, if not more, common points. So this can be used if you are not going for cross CC. So let's say you're playing arenas and there's a mage and he wants to CC this target. You don't want to be hit him with Phantom Knives while he's polymorph. So little things like this to just adjust your gameplay a little bit. Phantom Knives when you can, but don't Phantom Knives all the time. If you're playing Crucible Flame, you can actually use this ability quite often, and you should try to use it just about every lockdown, at least one charge, since you have 2 charges. You also can set up for Crucible Flame. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. So right here, I just used 1 charge of Crucible. The next charge is going to increase the damage further, and then the 3rd charge is going to hit the hardest. So what I can do is I can kind of keep my sustained damage on the enemy, wait until my kidney shot is available, and then try to see if I can all end the enemy with a kidney shot. So we'll probably pop something like, wait for my energy to be full, Toxic Blade, kidney shot, Vendetta, Mark for Death and Venom, Crucible, and try to see if I can just unload the most amount of damage into a singular target. If you're someone who wants to play your rogue at a maximum potential and you really do care about racials, these are going to be some of the best racials to play as a rogue. If you're going to be playing on Alliance, I would say Human is one of the best because they can get themselves out of a stun, which is really good, allows you to play with Relentless. Night Elf is also really good for their Shadow Meld ability. Shadow Meld can be used in order to catch yourself another re-stealth, so basically think of it as an extra Vanish if you use it right. It doesn't work like Vanish, that it has a protective 3 seconds of guaranteed stealth. But let's say you don't have any dots, so you need to dip into a stealth really quickly, and you have Subterfuge. Subterfuge will give you that capability for stealth if you are able to use the ability fast enough. Basically, you need to dip into Shadow Meld, press stealth, and then you'll have the access to your stealth abilities. Pressing Shadow Meld on its own doesn't do it. Dwarf is also not bad either, but I would even recommend something like a Dark Iron Dwarf instead, because they have basically the same ratio of removing all dots, but Dark Irons have a little bit extra stats to go with, while the normal dwarves, they basically clean you off of all the dots, but they have a defensive 10% reduction with it. They do a little bit extra damage from critical strikes, but you won't really notice the 2% in PvP. And Gnomes. Gnomes actually have a decent ratio with Escape Artist. It can be used in order to get yourself out of roots. And Assassination Rogues are not too mobile, so the ratio is actually quite good. If you're going to be playing Horde, the Orc Rogue is really good. It has the Hardness trait in order to reduce the duration of stuns on you. So it makes you a little bit less susceptible to stun locks. And it has a ratio in order to increase your damage while you're stunned. Blood Elf is also a really good option. It does give you Arcane Torrent, which can be used to remove a enemy buff. So things like Blessing of Protection can be dispelled, Soul of the Forest can be dispelled, Thorns can be dispelled. There's a couple of different abilities that could be dispelled. It's kind of RNG which one ends up taken off of your enemy. It depends what was the last buff that they applied to themselves. But if a Paladin just used Blessing of Protection and you use your Blood Elf racial, you will be able to take off the Blessing ASAP. The Undead is also a really good option as well. The ability for you to break out of fears and sleeps and charms is quite good. It gives you a little bit extra CC breakers. There's not too many classes that use fears, but it does help to have a fear breaker and a trinket 30 seconds after. But you don't really need to play any of the specific races if you just don't want to. It's just someone who wants to min-max your class. I've been playing Nightborn for I don't know how long, and I've been able to reach 2100 playing Outlaw with it. I don't really have a racial that's helping me in PvP by any measure, so racials can only take you so far. But if you're someone who's like super hardcore focused and you want to go for like Gladiator, maybe considering racial might be worth it. Alright, some of the useful macros you guys might enjoy. Have the SAP macro. It's really simple. Shell tooltip will simply just display the tooltip of SAP. If you don't want it, you don't have to add that in, but it's /clear target /target enemy /cast SAP. What this will do is it will kind of, once you install, we'll try to cycle through as many enemies in front of you, and you can kind of just spam it. And if it'll detect an enemy that's a stealthy, it will sap him immediately upon targeting. So this one I use in order to try to see if it can target stealthies. Another macro that's useful is a focus blind macro. It's just /use space open bracket add focus close bracket blind. And what you can do is you can actually copy this macro and replace blind with a kidney shot or a sap, shadow step, just about any ability you want to if you're someone who wants to be able to have control of main target and focus target at all times. And you can combine certain abilities together, like a step kidney shot macro is really effective. Just /use add focus shadow step and add focus kidney shot. And what you would essentially do is you would spam this macro. So you just kind of spam it if you're trying to get both those abilities to kind of go after one another. Don't just hit it once. And if you have, let's say, an unused trinket to buff your stats, a macro simple as cast vendetta /use 13 /use 14 will try to use both of your slots for your trinkets when you use vendetta. So if you have an unused trinket, like the badge for example, that'll give you extra stats. This will combine together with your vendetta, and when you vendetta enemy, it will also use those trinkets. Although be careful with this macro, because if you don't have a vendetta target, it will still use your trinkets. That's about everything that I have for you guys when it comes to assassination. I didn't really talk too much about corruptions because corruptions are still going through buffs and nerfs. I don't really have too crazy of corruptions, I just have one that increases my versatility from sources on my boots. But for the most part, you don't really need any crazy corruptions to play assassination. It is a spec that holds its own fairly well against other classes, and it doesn't really need all that extra help from different procs. If you do get a cool corruption, just about everything but Echoing Over the Void right now is still pretty good in terms of the damage. Stars can be pretty good, Gushing Moon can be pretty good, the Mindflay Tentacle can also be very good, especially if enemies don't even target to kill them. That can be some free damage for you. And most of them can proc from dots as well as auto attack, so dotting multiple enemies will give you more chances for corruptions to proc. So for assassination being a dot based spec, it's actually quite good. But thank you guys so much for watching this video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. You guys let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and hopefully this is everything you guys needed in order to get started with your assassination rogue. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see all of you in another video.